I really enjoy talking with people about their Sasquatch experiences. If you've had an experience you'd be willing to talk about with me in an interview like this, please send me an email at campingwithsasquatch@proton.me. If you prefer not to have an interview and are still willing to share your experience, send me an email and let me know if it's okay to share. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. I'm fascinated by this subject and always learning. When others share their experiences, it helps people like myself who are trying to understand even a small piece of this mystery. I'm especially interested in hearing experiences similar to those mentioned here that are on your property or have gone on for an extended time. Okay, on to my interview with Scott. I have reached out to Scott Taylor. I heard him speak a number of times. I think it was Bigfoot Society and then with Salish or Salish Sasquatch.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to reach out and have a conversation and as an interview so other people can hear it that would like to hear it. So, anyways, would you like to just kind of give a quick background about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. As it shows on the screen, my name is Scott Taylor. I had a Bigfoot encounter in October of 2005, about 10 miles west of where I live right now. Um, Turned my world upside down. Worldview is completely changed, realizing that, oh, they are real. I'd hunted my whole life and had never seen one. Just really didn't even think too much about it. I just kind of like, well, maybe they're there or maybe they're not there. But that event got me started in this. I coped by telling everybody, and that went over really well at work. um, and then over the next week or so, people would come up to me one by one and privately tell me their stories. And it turned out I had like half a dozen coworkers who'd actually seen them. And so it was like, well, around here, a lot of people see them. But I started reading everything I could, going on websites and reading the stories and starting to accumulate some knowledge, the background of the history of it, and like the Albert Osman story and the Ape Canyon story, and then some other really good stories. And then I found the BFRO website as I was searching around at lunchtime, and I saw they had expeditions you could sign up and go to. And so I thought, well, I want to do that. And so I signed up for it, and it was funny because this was early enough that Matt Moneymaker was going to every one of them, and he was actually organizing them. And so he calls me on the phone, and I hear this name, Matt Moneymaker, and I'm thinking, is this a scam or what is this? But I decided to go with it, and ended up going on the expedition up in the Cascades of Washington State, and it was a blast. I met 35 brand new friends, some of them still friends, be friends for life. Had experiences on that very first expedition, started networking with others. And so that got noticed by the BFRO people that had been there, and they said, "Hey, you want to become an investigator?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that." So they set me up with an account on what they call Flats. It's the backside of the BFRO website where all the reports are, and there's over 77,000 reports in there at the moment.
Wow.
Um, Not all of them have been investigated. Not all of them are publishable. Just a part of them have actually been followed up on because there's just so many. It's hard to keep up with. But anyway, I started going out and grabbing those reports and doing investigations. I was getting like 2 or 3 done a month, learning as I went, going out on more expeditions because once you're a BFRO member, it's free. You're expected to be staff, help other people. But
Mm.
I put the books away when I got into this and decided I'm going to learn it for myself. I don't want anybody influencing me on what these things are. I just want to learn it the hard way. And so I started doing that, learning from other investigators, learning for myself through experience, learning from talking to witnesses, and I ran into a couple that you would call habituation scenarios, where the people live out there in the rural lands, and the Bigfoots live nearby, and they kind of pretty soon realize that they each exist, and they start some sort of an interaction. And it can be ran the gamut from being really scary for these, really cool. They get to know each other, and it's a live and let live, and hi, how are you? It's good to see you today, kind of a situation. And so from those habituation scenarios and reports, I've learned the most about their behavior. You don't learn much from a Bigfoot sighting where somebody says, "Oh, I saw one cross the road in 1972." Well, what are you going to do with that? Okay, well, where was it? What did you see? What did it look like? What time of day was it? What time of the year was it? You get some information from that. And when you plot this stuff on a map, I have a map that I circle the location and make a little note by each one, and it starts to show you patterns of where they're seen, and what time of the year they're seen. And you get an idea for, well, what do they do? Where do they go in the spring, and where do they go in the fall? Because they migrate down to the lowlands, out of the Cascades, and spend the lowlands, or the winter in the lowlands, with the relatives who are here year round. There are some that don't move around. They stay in the same general area. But the ones that live up in the high country, they can't live up there when it's 20 feet of snow. So they have to migrate down. And so you learn those things. You learn where they travel, what routes they use. They'll follow waterways, they'll follow power lines, make it really easy for them, because they're usually well maintained. There's usually a road or something that the power company uses to maintain the area, and so they'll follow those. So you learn where kind of to expect them. But learned a lot. I've done about a little over 220 reports.
Wow.
While I was working at Boeing, I was single, and I had the time to go out and do, like I said, 2 to 3 reports a month, go on weekend trips often, and all that. And then I got myself promoted and ended up going into management, and then I had to cut back because the demands on a person are too much. And so I slowed down for a few years. And then after I retired, I've kind of picked it back up again, but not quite with the same passion as before, because it's like, well, I kind of got this, but I don't know it all. Nobody knows it all, so I'll never claim that. But you can meet somebody from, say, Missouri or Kentucky or Tennessee or Georgia, who's been doing the same kind of work, following up on reports and all that. And you sit down over campfire and you start talking about, well, what did you learn about this? And you'll find out everybody's learning the same things. So they're doing the same things in a lot of places. You find out, people start off, if they've had a Bigfoot sighting, they start off thinking, well, I'm looking for a great big caveman, or a monkey, or a mountain gorilla type being. And the more you learn, the more you realize, no, they're more than that. They're not just a dumb animal. If they were just a dumb animal, you could go out and take pictures of them. People take pictures of deer and elk, bears. Some people are really good, can even get cougars and that kind of thing. But they don't get Bigfoots. And Bigfoots don't like to have the picture taken in general. A few people have gotten some good stuff, but their attitude, their behavior, the way they roll is more closer to us, or to a human, than it is to an animal. You get into this and you find out, well, there's a thing called the Sierra sounds. Well, what the heck is that? I remember when I first heard clips of that on the BFRO website, and I went, what is that? And I listened to it, and I'm going, oh, that's language. I don't understand what it means, but it's clearly language.
It's a hard act to follow.
It sounds like he talks to us and they talk to each other.
Yeah.
And so I, got hold of Ron Moorhead, and we became friends. And he sent me, I bought, his CDs and listened to them all. If you're going to do that, I suggest you get volume 2. It's better than volume 1, but anything that Ron puts out is good stuff. Met people like Tom Powell. He's a retired school teacher. At the time I, met him, he was still a school teacher. He wrote the book,
The Locals.
And it's the first book I would recommend anybody read, and because it gives you a good overview of what they are and how they roll. For instance, here's one. If you just happen to stumble upon one and you see it, it's going to freeze. It's not going to move. And if you keep your eyes on it, it won't move. It'll stay there. But be prepared for something to come around behind you or off to the side and make a noise, make a whoop, bust a tree limb, throw a rock, do something to get you to take your attention off. And as soon as you look to the side, you look back, that one's gone, that was in front of you. It's the first place I heard about what we call, the woo stuff. Eye glow. I remember when people were seeing eye glow, and there was a huge debate amongst the investigators and other people, some people with PhD behind their names, that said that's impossible. How could that ever happen? But yet people are seeing it. They're seeing it all the time on expeditions. First expedition I went on, I got to see eye glow from about 20 feet away. Two big almond-shaped eyes, kind of like what you talked about before we started. And watched them blink, and it was on a night walk, and it was like, oh, this is really cool. And then one of the bravest gals that I ever met, she goes, oh, where is it? And I pointed it out, and she goes, oh, okay. And she walks up to it. Well, it didn't stick around, but man, you're out there looking for this 8-foot tall, 1,000-pound being, and this girl just walks right up to it. Well, she knew more about it than I do, a whole lot more.
Wow.
But eye glow, that was paranormal at the time. Mindspeak, cloaking, I've seen that myself. I've got friends that have seen it. My friend Barb Shoup got it on video, but that was in Tom Powell's book too. The idea of, if you're going to go out and you want to make contact with them, to have a good vibe about you, have a good attitude, go out there with gratitude, with respect, tell them who you are, introduce yourself, tell them that you mean no harm. And if you have an encounter, it will be a pleasant encounter. But if you go out there and you're afraid and you're angry and you're not showing to be a good person, your interaction may not be so good if you have it at all. There's this idea that whatever emotion you have built up inside you, they can somehow enhance that. So if you're scared, they're going to make you more scared. If you're happy to be there and interact with them, you'll be even more giddy about it when it really happens. How they do that, I don't know. They got a lot of talents. I've heard the mind speak. On one occasion, I was just out with a friend in an area where they were known to be. It was an old ghost town. Everything had been obliterated by the government down to just the concrete foundations. But you had to hike in. They'd locked it all up. It was a watershed area, and they'd locked it all up. So you had to hike in. And I'm out there, and I have my walking stick with my camera screwed to the end, kind of like a monopod. And I'm standing there, and I hear, "Put the camera away." I'm like, oh, where'd that come from? But I took the camera off, put it in my pouch. My friend standing next to me said, "What did you just hear?" And I said, They told me to put the camera away. She said, I heard it too.
Wow.
So, yeah, they'll talk to you. And then you find out over time that there are people who are very protective of them in often a habituation scenario, where not only do they interact with them regularly, they've even learned their names, and they've learned the knack of how to speak with them. They'll talk through the Mindspeak, they'll talk through mental images, the mental slideshow. I had that happen to me once. A friend of mine had his whole life reviewed by one of them. Actual verbal speaking. They seem to know, they have their own language, and then they generally will speak the native dialect. For here it'd be Salish. Know a little bit of English, and had them respond appropriately. Had one witness who would go out behind his place in the brush, and he would just sit down on a stool, and this one that would hang around during the wintertime would come over and sit with him, and he would tell it stories and jokes and stuff, and it would just look at him. It wouldn't say anything. But one day he thought, well, I want to find out how much this guy knows. And so he just said, well, I got to go now. But he didn't stand up. He just sat there. But the Bigfoot stood up. So it understood him what he meant by I got to go now. So they're not dumb. And then they have their bird call language. They have the rock clacking and their tree knocking and that kind of thing. They have a lot of different ways they can communicate. So, they're not lightweights in the intellectual department. They're just supremely geared towards the environment they live in. Anyway, I could go on and on. You got?
Oh man, I was there's a few points you brought up where I wanted to ask you, but I also didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, I figured I needed to stop so you could ask some questions.
Yeah. Well, I actually really enjoyed just listening to you go. It's really fascinating to me how you've got this access to the BFRO database, and you've gotten, I think, over 200 investigations yourself. I believe you've gone on a lot of expeditions, and you've come up to these conclusions. I mean, you work for Boeing. You're obviously
engineer.
Engineer type thinking, and just listening to you, I can tell that you've just heard patterns, observed patterns, to come to certain conclusions.
Yeah.
The one of the last things you mentioned, you said the bird language, and that's something I've focused a bit on lately, is just what sounds out there might be mimics, imitations of an owl or a blue jay. And it seems, once again, I'm hearing it from you, I've heard it from others, so that seems to be a real thing. Going back, though, when you mentioned the place that the government wrecked that you went to and you had your experience with Mindspeak, which I'd like, do you think that had anything to do with Sasquatch, that they kind of blocked the whole place off? And
no, I don't really think that's why they did it. They turned that whole area into a watershed. It used to be that people could drive it was an alternate route from eastern Washington through the Cascades and down into the Puget Sound area. And they blocked that road off on both ends, gated them off, and it's probably 40 miles through there. But they don't even let anybody go in there to go hunting, no fishing. They have the rangers that drive around in there, but you're not allowed there. So, they don't seem to mind you going in from the east end and going into this ghost town. It's called Lester. Nobody cares up there. It's the other end, the western end, where there's more people that they care more about. So that, you can park at the gate, you can walk in, nobody's going to stop you, but there's nothing there to see. There's railroad trestle and some old roads and some foundations where people used to live. I think the last person that was alive there was in the 90s. It was a woman who then passed on, and as soon as she was the last one gone, that's when they came in and they got rid of everything. So the Bigfoots, the stories from around there have been historical. I mean, people talk that lived there talked about it happening all the time. And it's like it was a place where they could go, catch a deer or catch an elk and eat it. I know some people think that they don't do that. People have observed it happening. They've observed them taking them down. They usually just, from what I understand, they will take out the liver and some of the internal organs and eat those, leaving the rest. Maybe it's the vitamins. Who knows? Everybody's just guessing. But there was a lot of that kind of report from that area. So we thought we'd go in and just see what was there. Ended up seeing a bear, having that experience too. The Mindspeak, out not too far away, and absolutely nothing happened. I mean, we weren't too far, camped out, went on some night walks, walking around. Absolutely nothing at all happened. Sometimes that's the way it goes.
I'm curious about, you mentioned over time, speaking with people all over the country, you'd see patterns of behavior and stuff, and it seemed like you come to. Can you touch on that a little? Like any things, kind of generalized observations that you've picked up like that from brainstorming and.
So, if somebody is living out in an area where they live, the interaction will start off kind of slow. The people will notice odd things happening. Maybe some of their animal food goes missing, the horse feed, the cob, and they might see a glimpse of something here and there. Maybe if they leave out a tool outside, because they're working on a project, so they leave their Black & Decker, drill motor, sitting on a sawhorse, they come out the next day, it's gone. And then they find it maybe a couple of days later, a couple hundred yards away on a trail somewhere. And it's like, well, okay, this odd stuff is happening. And then after a while, maybe especially if they get a good sighting, then they'll understand what it is that they're dealing with. Then the question comes down to, what do you do with that? Are you okay with that, or are you afraid? Probably 9 times out of 10, the people are terrified because they have suddenly realized that there's a great big, quote, monster out there, and they don't know what its intentions are, what it can do to them. They don't understand anything about it. And then if they call us, we come out and we'll investigate, we'll look for the signs of them. And oftentimes when you know what to look for, you start looking around their property and you can find the telltale signs that they're there. And these people never ever saw it. They never knew that little rock pile was something that they put there. They didn't know that dead rabbit that showed up on the porch was a gift. They just didn't realize, they didn't put those things together. And you can talk to them about that, say, okay, well, this is the kind of thing you can expect for them to do if they're hanging around. If you want it to continue, don't put out trail cameras, don't put out motion sensor lights, and make them feel welcome. You can start gifting. You can, don't put food on the ground. They won't eat food off the ground. You have to put it on a stump or a table or top of a log or someplace, but not on the ground. If you're going to feed them peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, don't use white bread, use wheat bread. If you use white bread, they'll throw it on the ground and they won't touch it. But if you use wheat bread, they'll take it. Other things like if they take a pile of sandwiches, they're going to leave you some. They're not going to take them all because they want you to know that they've left some for you. So that shows you some human-like empathy, that they realize you need to eat too. So they're going to leave you some. We had one place where my wife and I went. These people are like family to us now, but we had left. We'd stayed the night. We put out a great big tray of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. As usual for that place, when company was there, us, they wouldn't do anything. But as soon as we would leave, they would take the sandwiches. Well, we left the sandwiches. We got up in the morning. We packed up our stuff. Said goodbye, leaving the sandwiches there. We got home. Next morning, I got a phone call from them. They said, well, they took all the sandwiches, but here's the good part. they left one of the sandwiches leaning against our back sliding door. And so we, took off, went back down there, and that sandwich had been placed, leaned right up against the door, as if to say, okay, we took the sandwiches, but here's one for you.
Wow.
And so I thought that was pretty cool. At the same site, the people started leaving apples. They'd take a bag of apples, and the guy had a stick with a hook on it, and he would hang them up in a tree. That way, unlikely to be raccoons, unlikely to be a bear, rule those things out as much as you could. And they would take some of the apples and they would leave some of the apples. One particular apple, a juvenile had taken, and he'd eaten half, and then he put the other half down. Well, I got that, and I was able to make a casting of that showing the teeth. That was pretty cool.
I was just going to ask about the teeth impressions in it.
Yep. One day they were gifted about 10 little mice that they had wrapped up in grass like little mummies, and then tied the middle with a knot. And they'd left them in a pile with, I think, 4 of them were all in a straight row. And they seemed to be OCD about geometry, circles, triangles, boxes, things in a straight row, making lines with rocks, shotgun shells, that kind of thing. And this is behavior that people could do, but people don't do. So those are subtle signs, that they're around if you know what to look for. So you educate the people, and if they're okay with it, then life goes on. They're used to it. They might get to know these individuals, maybe not by name. Some people never reach that level, but they get to know them, and it's all cool, and everybody's happy, And then over time, they'll leave that area, and other ones might come in who are not used to these people. And so now it all starts all over again. At this one site we were working, when the original family of Sasquatches, it was a blonde female, a 9-foot tall gray male, and initially there was two young ones, and then a third one was born while we were investigating it. Actually got one of them on thermal video one night. But they were all used to each other and really liked each other. They didn't like the people's dogs, but they did like the people. Then around 2020, that group left, and others came into the property, but those other ones had a different attitude. Their attitude was, you stay in your house because everything outside your house is our territory. So they had to work through some issues to get them to understand that, no, we're going to go where we want to on our property, but we'll be respectful of you, but we don't want any trouble. So that kind of got worked out, and that group didn't even stay. And now, tell you the truth, there's not much of anything going on there. And I don't know why, but that's what happens.
So is this the same group of people that had the 2 separate groups of Sasquatch come and go? The same couple, or so? Yeah. I'm imagining that you might have even helped them come to the conclusion that was the parameters that the Sasquatch were trying to set by, I mean, maybe they came up with it on their own, but that's a really interesting one, because there's a lot of people out there I've heard of, and they're pretty secretive about it, but they've got what they would consider a problem at home, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know how to deal with it. And that's interesting that you sensed that they were they doing things like slapping the house or making sounds or walking on the roof or
well, just to talk about this one place in particular, because it was so much fun, and one of the things that happened was when we first started going there, they had a couple of horses, so they had the pastures around their house. And they were finding Bigfoot footprints in the paths that they would use when they bring the horses from the pasture into the barn. These people they would find the horse's mane braided, and she'd comb it all out, and then the next morning it'd be braided again. They had a few goats. They would bring the goats into the barn at night, but something would come along and it would rip the gate off the barn to get in there, and it didn't hurt the goats. What they think it was trying to do was let them out. Also inside the barn, they had a steel sawhorse that had a cow's, plastic cow's head, mounted to the top, and it was for learning how to rope cows. And it thought that was a real thing, and it grabbed at it and started dragging it all around the barn and ended up breaking it. The mental picture of what probably happened at that time was kind of funny. One night they heard one yelling, and the guy goes out and he sees it, and it's got its crotch hair tangled up in the electric fence. And so it was howling about that. It finally ripped itself free.
Wow.
But it didn't hold the people responsible for it getting hurt. It didn't make that connection. One day I went over to visit them, and I go walking up on their front porch, which big covered front porch. And I looked down at the boards, and there's Sasquatch hair just stuffed in between the boards. And so when they came to the door, I says, "Hey, they've been staying out on your front porch, haven't they?" And they said, "Yeah, they when it's raining, they'll come up on the front porch and just hang out there."
Wow.
And one night, it was a December night, right around Christmas time, the woman's going to go out onto that front porch. It's, I think, about 8 o'clock at night. It's dark. And so she goes out there to have a smoke, and she turns on the light. And here's a little juvenile one standing up there holding onto the back of a rocking chair. And, it looked at her, she looked at it, and then it decided, I got to get out of here, and vaulted over the railing and took off into the dark.
Wow.
Fun treat for her. I got there early the next morning, and there was still a wet, kid-sized impression in their hammock. So what it was doing, it was hanging out, laying in the hammock that was there. And when it heard her open the door, it jumped up, and before it could get away, she got to see it. They would leave rocks on the railing, rocks and sticks that, they'd pick them up, leave them in patterns, straight rows, circles. It appeared that the number of rocks always corresponded with how many were in their group. 2 big rocks, 3 little rocks. They decided one summer they were going to put up a swimming pool. So they bought one of these above ground pools, about 4 feet deep, about 15 feet across, had a little ladder to crawl in, and had a pump and a filter and all that, so they keep the water clean. They filled it all up, and they were going to use it the next day, and they go out there, and the top is covered with grass and hair and bugs and an oily sheen. And so, well, what the heck's been in here? And they cleaned all that off, and they cleaned out the filter. The filter was full of hair. And the next day it happened again. So they got on the phone and they said, "Scott, we think the Bigfoots are using our pool, or at least the juveniles are using the pool." And so I went down there, and they'd drug mud in the pool, and there was footprints in the bottom of the pool in that mud. And
that's unbelievable.
and
Wow.
They gave me a big wad of hair that I still have. And I gave some of that hair to Cindy Dosen up in Vancouver, BC. And she does microscopic analysis of the hair. And it was some sort of unknown human. The hair had never been cut. Our hair, I don't have any more, but our hair, when you get a haircut, it cuts the end off straight. And so when you look microscopically, you look at the end of the hair, you can see it's been cut. Well, when it's never been cut, it's more natural. It's frayed out. It's different. So yeah, she came back with a really nice report. So some sort of unknown, it's not exactly human, but it's not any animal, and it's closer related to a human hair than not. So their hair is like our hair. When you find it out in the forest, in places, it looks like a human's hair. So that family had the last baby actually in the pool.
Wow.
Yeah, a birth under the water, or in the water, and people do that. My oldest son and his wife, they elected to use that method on their first baby. It was a water birth, born at home, with a midwife there, which would be the natural way that a Bigfoot might do it, or could do it. And like I said, we did get to see the juveniles running around. She had a brother that came to stay with them, and he'd been injured, so he had a traumatic brain injury, and he was having to actually learn how to walk again, learn how to talk again. So he was a little bit childlike in his demeanor. They didn't tell him when he came to stay. They didn't tell him that there were Sasquatches on the property. And within 2 days, he was telling them about the big hairy people he saw out behind their house. There are certain people that just seem to pique their sense of empathy or something. This same guy had gone over to the neighbor's house and stayed till after dark. And he's coming home, so man, he had to cross a fence, walk through a pasture to get to the driveway where he was staying. Well, in the dark, he missed the driveway, walked past it, and fell into the ditch on the other side. And so he's plopped down in the ditch, water up to his chest. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. He had his cat with him, and he's holding the cat up in the air to keep the cat out of the water, but he's, completely down in the water. And he said 2, quote, trees reached down and picked him up out of the water, one on each side, and carried him up to the road, set him on the road, faced him towards the house, and and just go,
Wow.
showed him which way to go home.
Is this the same? This is the same family this whole time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Same family.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There was another one where again, a rural spot, end of the road. It's a second to the end house. And the husband would go to work in town, and he was in construction, and leave his wife there by herself. And she would work with horses. She had horses there, a barn, stables, and all that. And so she would work with horses, and pretty soon she realized that she was being watched. A lot of women are real sensitive to that stuff. They pick up on that vibe where us guys aren't so good at it. But she picked up on that something was going on. And then they started seeing them here and there. They were a little upset about it. So I went out there and I said, well, I see down in your barn, you've got a refrigerator there. Does anything ever go missing? And she stopped and she thought about it for a second. She said, something's been stealing the carrots. She says, I have carrots in there. I give to my horses, but something's been taking the carrots. So suddenly it clicked, what was going in there was them. We went out there, a group of us, about 8 of us went out there. We camped out on her lawn, spent the night, and the Bigfoots were there, and they were watching us. And whenever somebody would get up to go to the bathroom, you would hear tick tap or stick tapping, like 2 drumsticks, tap, 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 tap. And they were warning the others that, one of them is getting up, the zipper's being done. They're getting up, but they didn't leave. This woman was a smoker, so she would get up at 1 a.m. to go to the bathroom, and I need a smoke. So she'd go out on her back porch in the dark, wouldn't turn on the light, and have a smoke. Well, that was perfect opportunity. She would catch the little ones playing in her yard. So she, it was this is becoming kind of regular now. one day she called me up and she said, "Scott, have you ever heard of them singing?" And I said, "Yeah, I've heard a couple of stories of them singing." I said, "What did you hear?" And she says, "Well, it walked by our property and out into the road, and it was singing." And I said, "Well, what did it sound like?" And she said, "Well, it was a female and it was happy, but she sounded like she was singing in Chinese." Another time she said, "I think there's one that sleeps out in that clear cut during the daytime." I said, "Well, okay, why do you think that?" She says, "Because I can hear snoring. He sounds like my husband, but he's out in the clear cut." And, so that was going on. I went,
Unbelievable.
yeah, I went out there another time with another friend. We didn't go to this person's house, but nearby were gated logging roads. You could park there and you could hike around. And there was one particular gate you'd hike about a mile down, and then it'd take you to the river, the Nisqually River. And a lot of people would hike down there and they'd go fishing and that kind of thing. So, I go walking down there and, we're just looking around, see what you can see. And all of a sudden, right in front of us, a great big limb got ripped off a tree, kerwhack. And that was all we got to see. But,
Wow.
that was one of them doing that. It didn't just fall. It was a night. There was no reason for that limb to come down. Similar situation in another place. I had followed up on a report there, cast a footprint in their garden. This woman who, tall blonde woman, she was about 6 foot tall, and she would, at the end of the day, she'd go tend to her garden, but she'd sit out on a chair outside at the corner of her garden and, have a smoke and just sit there and wait for it to get dark, just kind of decompressing from the day. And she realized that she had a visitor that would sneak up behind her and just observe her. And so that's when she called us. And then, I went out and I found the footprint, cast it for her, gave it to her. She would lose a chicken here or there, a duck here or there, some vegetables sometimes. One day, she called and says, "Hey, can you come on out?" And so I got another investigator friend, a gal, and she came with me. When we got there, there was suddenly a big commotion. Her father, who only had, she lived with her parents because her parents were elderly, so she was kind of taking care of them. Her father only had one leg, and he would fall sometimes. So he had fallen, and they're calling 911, and because he got hurt when he fell. And so me and the other investigator, we just went around the other side of their house just to get out of the way. And as soon as we came around the corner of the house, the Bigfoot was like 50 yards away across the fence, standing right there. And he grabbed a big old limb and went crack, and he just turned and walked away. So,
Wow.
here's two examples of them grabbing a big limb and breaking it, making a big racket doing it. Similar behaviors, two different places. A lot of people report it. It's not unusual. It's kind of like you said, when they push a tree down.
Yeah.
Had that happen a number of times.
That's something else when you hear that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How often do you hear trees fall in the woods? And you do find out that if a tree falls in the woods, it does make a sound.
Yeah. Like you said earlier before we started recording, I grew up with woods in the backyard, and I never in my life had heard a tree fall down until this stuff. And I've heard quite a few of them now.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much time do you have left? I don't want to. I know that.
I got to be out of here in about an hour. I got an appointment in town.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay. Great. I mean, I'm not hoping to keep all your time, but just making sure that you're not needing to go like right now.
I appreciate that. No problem.
Yeah.
We can keep talking.
Great. I mean, my gosh, if you were gonna have to go now, I was already thinking like I'm gonna have part 2, hopefully.
Maybe make this into part 2. Break it into 2.
That's a good idea. Well, that might be a good idea because I was gonna ask you, and we could start with this. I'm curious about how that situation went and how that went with the second group that seemed to be trying to stake their territory and tell them not to even come outside or whatever. And I'd like to know how that went. and then also
Okay.
kind of what you would recommend for people who are having a situation on their property. And I'm guessing that you've had some involvement with some of these situations, and it sounds like they went to a peaceful outcome, which
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of in the past. And just I was also just tying it together. There's the family, and then is that woman down the same street? Like, are they close by?
No, no,
Okay.
they're 40 miles apart.
Oh wow. So still
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Thanks for watching. I had a little background noise for my mic and edited out some of my responses. There will be another video to hear more from Scott, some amazing insights and experiences.